Hello, everybody. So I tried something out there, having a little like splash image or something go live first, so that way, as soon as I actually start talking, I know I'm already live. So kind of a thing there. We'll see how that works. And I'm probably going to change this lower third. In fact, I'm going to get rid of it right now because it's too big. So I was trying to find something that was like a good lower third, but that's just like taking up. I mean, I guess it's a lower third. I don't know. Anyway, we're gonna get rid of that. Okay. So just trying out some things. As you hope maybe you notice, my lighting is a little bit better today. Still working on it because you can kind of see the glare of the lights in my glasses, but we'll play with that. So new lights and figuring out how they best work. But anyway, welcome to Pro Life Pro Liberty Live. Glad to have you guys. Glad to be, here still streaming still. I'm still on YouTube. I'm still on Tumblr. I'm still on Twitter. They haven't gotten me yet. So I don't know if I just haven't said anything crazy enough or what, but we'll see what happens. So anyway, we've been, a lot of things have been going on, censorship wise, especially. We're seeing a lot of censorship, and it's been very concerning, not just people getting kicked off or flagged or demonetized. I mean, we're seeing people like Tim Pool get demonetized, which it's like he's the most kind of, I go to him because he's middle of the road. Like, I don't go to him for extreme left or right. I go to him because he's going to be like a rational person and I don't agree with him on everything, but he does the news well and he is sensible and he's not sensationalizing everything. But he got demonetized. So, and that's really what I want to talk about, and I know I'm sure, and like, that's the thing is everybody's talking about censorship. Like every channel you go to, every person you talk to is talking about censorship. So it's just, it's almost overdone, but I think we can't stop talking about it. We can't let it like become normal. We can't get used to this. This is not something that's okay. And I kind of said this about COVID at the beginning, where I said I was really concerned that we would reach a point where COVID was no longer the biggest thing, where COVID was just like the new normal. Yeah, it's the whole concept of the new normal, where we normalize lockdowns and mask mandates and all of that, and this is just how life is now. I worried about that, and we're there, honestly, because even people who don't think COVID's that big of a deal, like as far as being a virus, it's like, oh, it's just, it's a bad cold, it's a bad flu, but I guess I can wear the mask. I guess I can social distance. I guess I can, like, we have to realize how much of an intrusion this has been on our lives and how much it still is. And now we've got Cuomo and Lightfoot saying that oh, we need to open up now and all of this. And it's just, we can't let this just fade away. We have to make, we have to, reach a point where we say enough and the people say enough. If we kind of just let this fade away and fade into the background, and maybe we're still wearing masks for the next 3 years, but but we open things up or whatever, and this just becomes normal, then they got away with it, and they were able to lock us down, censor us, um, ruin businesses, do all this stuff, and they're going to keep doing it. They're going to do it again for the flu in the fall. Even if they say COVID is over this summer, they'll lock us down again. And now we have the political censorship with all of basically the idea that if you are conservative or you support Trump or you think there was election fraud, you're now inciting violence. What does it say about our system when simply opposing fraud and being concerned about fraud is now inciting violence? But I think it comes back to what I've said before and what other people have said is that, there is a spirit of resistance in America. America was founded on the idea that if things get really bad, people will say enough. And so I think when they say inciting violence or inciting whatever, it's because they recognize that Americans have had enough. And so that the people who are saying, we got, something's wrong here, the people who are pointing out the problems, the establishment is scared of them because they understand that at some point we could all just say enough. And that if we all said enough at the same time, they wouldn't be able to do anything. And so it gets, so they censor and they crush and they deplatform not just people but entire social networks. They deplatform Parler. Um and and it's not even just like, you got, okay, people getting kicked off of Twitter, okay, Parler, being kicked off the App Store, even, Amazon Web Services kicking Parler off of their servers. All of that, I can be like, okay, you know what? In a true free market, they have the ability to do that. Now, these companies never should have been this big to begin with, that they have this much power. And that's partially because of anti-competitive regulations that they lobby for, that, the government enforces, and the government's like, oh, you're being anti-competitive. It's like, well, you're enforcing their anti-competitiveness. But anyway, even with all of that, let's say we take care of that, we get rid of those regulations, we allow competition, and then yeah, Amazon Web Services wants to kick off whoever, whatever. What gets me is that, so Parler, when they shut down, they said, hey, okay, we're going to shut down. It's going to be like 12 hours. We'll be back. Because they assumed they could just go to another server, another hosting service besides Amazon Web Services, because it's just, okay, Amazon kicked us off. We'll go to somebody else. Somebody else will take us. We're bringing a lot of business. We're bringing a lot of money with us. But essentially, Amazon went and threatened, like a mob boss, threatened all the other hosting services with, essentially, we will blacklist you if you host Parler. And so this network that was like, hey, we're gonna get all this, stuff figured out, it'll be okay, all of this, it like, it's not just free market now, we're talking about like mafia activity. And so you have to say, like, okay, what do we do now? Do we somehow get, the government to step in? But the government regulations are what caused this problem. People are talking about nationalizing Twitter. Are you kidding me? No, we don't put the government more in charge of social media than it already is. There's already too much integration between state and corporation. We don't want more. We need to get the government out and allow for competition. But anyway, like, I could go on about censorship all day. I could go on about regulations and competition and free market all day long. I could do that all day long. But what I really, really want to talk about is the consequences of this censorship. And I want to say this, and I know I'm not going to have a whole bunch of like liberal people watching this. Maybe some will, maybe somebody will. But I really want to say to the people who are celebrating all the Trump supporters and conservatives and even libertarians, and it's not even just Trump supporters, it's anybody who's not left getting kicked off of Twitter. If you're celebrating this, I want you to understand what it is that's happening. See, the narrative has been that Twitter and other social media are kicking off radicals, right? People who are potentially terrorists, people who are promoting insurgency. That's not what's happening. Sure, there may be some of those people in the mix, but a lot of the people who are being kicked off or limited or censored in any way are just people who disagree with the left and who believe there was election fraud, and who, that doesn't mean you're inciting violence or insurgency or whatever. But what you do when you deplatform regular people, people who thought that they were just expressing their opinion, who weren't calling for violence, who weren't inciting insurrection, who were just expressing their concerns, they were just speaking their mind, they're exercising their First Amendment right, their free speech. When you censor, ban, deplatform those people, and in some cases get them fired, you create radicals. You create this underground resistance, radicalized group. So if you want to create insurgents, if you want to create radicals, this is how you do it. You take away their ability to express themselves, their ability to speak, their ability to participate in society. You kick them off airplanes and put them on no-fly lists. That's how you create radicals. You push them to essentially, basically the dark web. When we talk, people talk about the dark web. It's essentially just the web that is not connected to Google, and it's the free market web in a sense. It's the internet outside of the big tech companies. That's what the dark web is. And they call it, and that's the thing, is that even that phrase dark web, it makes you think of like illegal back alley activity. But for the most part, it's literally just, I don't want to be connected to Amazon and Google and all this stuff. But that's the thing, is what you do is you take all the people who have essentially been kicked out of society, have been kicked out of the public square, and you stuff them all in a back alley, right? So you have this public square of conversation and dialogue and all of this, and you take all the people you don't like and you put them in that like dark alley behind the bar or whatever, where where you don't have to see them or hear them. The problem is, what you're putting together is you've got the actual radicals, right? You've got the actual like um prone to violence, inciting whatever people, like the actual people who are trying to incite violence, trying to incite insurrection. And then you take the everyday people who are just frustrated and just letting off some steam, and you put them together. That's what you did. You put them together. Because you see, before, the average everyday person could let off some steam, could say some things on Twitter, kind of get it out of their system. And the true people inciting violence, the true people calling for, you know, revolution or whatever, they got kicked off. They were off in the dark corners of the internet. But you just threw all the people who are frustrated, scared, angry, you just threw them all together. That's how you radicalize people. The other way you radicalize people is you show them that all the peaceful, legal, normal means of having their grievances heard and addressing their problems are gone. You shut down their business. You get them fired, whether it's you get them laid off because you shut down their business for COVID, or you get them fired because of their political opinions. You take away their ability to protest, to speak freely, to gather, to assemble. You shut them out of their churches, or try to shut them out of their churches in some cases. Um, you disconnect them from friends and family. You turn their friends and family against them. So you have all these people who are frustrated, desperate, people who lost their jobs, who lost their livelihoods, their businesses, people who built up businesses. They'd spent decades building a business and they're finally successful. They finally are seeing the fruits of their labor. It's finally all worth it. And then you shut them down and they lose everything. And when you've lost everything, and then you're told you're not welcome, your ideas are not welcome, your voice is not welcome, that's how you become a radical. So there's a lot of people who were not radicals before this purge, before the censorship, who will become them, who will become radicals, will be radicalized by Twitter, by Facebook, not because they were on Facebook, but because they got kicked off. How many people, when Parler got shut down, suddenly woke up and realized that corporations controlling everything is not a good idea? How many people realized that their vote doesn't matter, that their speech doesn't matter, that speaking does nothing, that voting does nothing? That's the lesson that you've taught them. What happens when people who have learned that lesson, who have learned speaking does nothing, voting does nothing, the system is broken, the courts do nothing, the system is broken? What is left? for those people? Where do they go? What do they do? They just give up and move on? No, that's and the thing is, here's the thing. There are some groups of people who you could do all this to, and they might just give up and shuffle off and, you know, be dejected and just move on. But you're doing this to a group of people who are known for being fighters, who are known for being hard workers who don't give up. You took people who had built businesses, who had faced adversity, who had faced challenges, who got to where they were because they didn't give up easily, because they didn't take no for an answer, because they kept going and they were innovative and they found new ways of doing things. You took that group of people and you gave them a new challenge. You shut them down, you kicked them out. They are not the type to give up and slink away. And I say this to anybody who celebrates censorship, that you do not realize what you've just created. And I know I don't like it either. I'm not celebrating it. I'm not saying, "Oh, look, oh, here we come. We're going to get you." No. That's not that's not what I'm here to say. I'm here to say it's terrifying because I look at what's happening and I look at the people who have just been kicked and kicked and kicked while they're down. And now you had to give them just one more thing. You had to just poke them one more time. And I see people in pain. I see people who are hurting, who are angry. And you've cut them off from any peaceful, healthy means of dealing with that. You've cut them off from everything that they had in their life that promoted stability and normalcy. What is left? The Capitol riots on last Wednesday, or 2 Wednesdays ago now. Wow, it's already been over a week. The Capitol riots were the result of a people that have been kicked and pushed and poked. And yeah, there were agitators. There were BLM, Antifa people in that crowd. We know that. CNN hosted two of them on a show and interviewed them. And then those two people were later arrested because they were instigating the riot. But the thing is, you had a crowd there. That crowd was not just Antifa. That crowd was not just BLM. That crowd was people who were angry and frustrated and hurt. And that crowd came to DC intending to protest, intending to hold signs and yell and make some noise and maybe cheer on some of the Republicans who were going to object to the Electoral College confirmation. They weren't coming there to riot. They weren't coming there to incite violence. But they came there frustrated, angry, and basically on the edge of having nothing left to lose. So, I mean, they were dry tinder. Doesn't mean they were the match, but they were the dry tinder. And who created that dry tinder? Who made them get to this point where they were ready to push past barricades and go into the Capitol? It was the media, it was big tech, it was the left. Y'all pushed them to that point, and then you blamed Trump. Blamed Trump for what you pushed them to, with over 4 years of incendiary rhetoric. You want to talk about Trump inciting violence? You spend 4 years with the incendiary rhetoric of the left, of the mainstream media. You have to take responsibility for that. You have to understand that the censorship is not the way forward. It's not the way back to calm and peace. It's the way to war. It's the way to sectionalism. And this is the thing. So, I teach history, right? When we talk about the Civil War, We talk about causes of the Civil War. Everybody wants to talk about slavery, and yes, that was a factor. But there's so much else that led up to that that if you don't take those other factors into consideration, you miss the point. And one of the big things, one of the huge things was sectionalism. And that's the idea that you have North and South, and they're two different parts of the country. They they have different cultures, they have different values, and they're trying to share a government. And that was the problem. And that's why, and again, when we talk about Civil War, we're talking about slavery. That's not it's not something to make excuses for. We don't want to make excuses for slavery. But you look at the Confederacy and you look at what their solution was. Their solution was to leave. They said, you know what? North and South are not compatible. Uh, we can't share a government because we're just too different. Our values are too different. So we're just going to leave. And the North said no. The Union said no. You can't leave. We will force you to share a government with us. And here's the thing, if who knows what it would have looked like if the South had just left and the North had let them. But I think as we look at what's happening now, and we look at the incendiary rhetoric, and we look at the division, and we look at the geographic sectionalism, we look at the parts of the country. A great example is, electoral maps. And I think if you're looking at, like, let's say you pull up 270 to win and you look at the map of the election results, I think you need to turn Arizona and Georgia at the very least red. Michigan and Wisconsin, I think they were on the edge. They weren't clear red, but Georgia and Arizona, I don't think are as blue as the vote results made them look. At the very least, Georgia is not blue. Sorry, Georgia is not blue. No, it's not. But if you look at that map and you look at those areas and you look and you see those dividing lines, you see what the borders of these countries would be if we were to say, you know what, we're going to peacefully step away from each other. We're not going to share a government anymore because it's not fair to either of us. And that's the thing, is it's not like the idea of the peaceful divorce, which is the way some people are phrasing it, is the idea that we don't have to force each other to live under, like, I don't have to force you to live under my value system. I can have my value system, you can have yours, and we can go our separate ways. Under our current system, every 4 years we vote, every 2 years really, we vote to subjugate half the country to the values of the other half. And it used to be that the left, that liberals, Democrats, were all about tolerance of other views and saying, you know what, you can't push your values on me. You can't make me live by your rules. Keep your rosaries off my ovaries, is what you would hear at a pro-life march, And they would say that until they got power, until they had big tech and the corporations and the government. Now, all of a sudden, it's you must abide by our values. And I think the best solution, the one that has the most potential for a peaceful outcome, is one where we say, you know what? We are too big and we have too many divisions to peacefully share a government. We can be friends, we can work together, but we need to have our autonomy. We need to have our independence. And this part of the country over here needs to be its own government. This part over here needs its own government. We separate, we can trade with each other, we can work with each other, but we cannot share a government anymore. It's just not doable. And we're too big. And I said this last week, we are too big to share a government. And so I said in the title and the description that I was going to talk about two paths that I see us going down. And it really kind of comes down to the next week, inauguration day and the aftermath of that, and whatever happens or doesn't happen. Because there's been a lot of talk that is talking up this idea that there's going to be some crazy event, and it's happening on both sides. You're seeing it kind of in the pro-Trump QAnon like circles. You're seeing this talk of some kind of crazy thing that's going to happen on Wednesday or before Wednesday. And then you see it on the left where they're all panicked that there's going to be some kind of insurrection, some kind of violent uprising on Inauguration Day. And I think it is possible that we could see violence that day. I do definitely think we will see protests. What happens with those protests, I don't know. I think there's a high potential for some kind of false flag because there's been so much amping up on the side of the government that we're the FBI is like, oh, all 50 states have plots of insurrection or whatever at their capitals, or there's violent protests planned or whatever. Like the FBI is like every single state, all 50 states have something crazy planned, and it's like, I don't believe that, especially when every major group is saying, no, we're not planning anything, we're not going anywhere, we're not telling anybody to go. It takes a lot to mobilize. I don't think people realize how much it takes to mobilize a large group. You have to have some big organizations on board if you want to mobilize thousands of people, much less hundreds of thousands or millions that it would take to have massive protests at every state capital. And there's a lot of fear, and I think a lot of it is put out there on purpose. And I worry that on Wednesday or before Wednesday or after Wednesday, sometime this coming week, we're going to see something that is going to be made to look like violence from Trump supporters. It won't be it won't be led by any person you recognize. It won't be endorsed by any organization you're part of. It will be somehow it'll be these people you've never heard of who are supposedly Trump supporters, and they're gonna do something crazy, and something's gonna feel off about it. It's not gonna feel right. I'm just saying I think that's possible. And if we go down that route, there's the potential that if it's a large enough event that we could see it kick off some real craziness. And I've talked before on here about societal collapse and the possibility of just a complete collapse where all our social order is gone, and where all of our the infrastructure we rely on is gone. And there's lots of ways that could happen. But um, I think I think there's the potential for a massive event that could do that. Now, I don't know that it's going to happen. I'm saying it's possible. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's something that I'm watching out for. Um, Again, I don't think that Trump supporters are going to go out en masse on the 20th and like cause violence. That doesn't mean I don't think there will be violence or that there will be something crazy that happens. There's also the possibility, and I'm kind of lumping these all together into one thing. This is essentially the path or the outcome where something crazy happens, whether it's a mass civil unrest, a terror like something, a grid down scenario, which is something that I've warned about and I've talked about on this channel plenty of times, is what do you do if there's a grid down scenario? Are you prepared for that? So again, 2 weeks of food and water at the bare minimum. Okay, 2 weeks of food and water at the bare minimum. But if there is some kind of grid down scenario, if there is some kind of supply chain disruption, whatever that may look like, or if there's some kind of craziness, because a lot of people are like, well, maybe Trump will do this, Trump will do that. If there is some kind of something that looks like an attempted coup or whatever, again, I don't think this is the most likely scenario, but I do think it's possible. I do think it's worth being prepared, because if it happens, you'll be glad you were. And if it doesn't happen, well, again, nothing wrong with being prepared, right? There's no downside to being prepared. So you might as well, just in case, if you think something might happen. Now, the more likely scenario is the one where Inauguration happens, maybe there's some protests, maybe there's even some kind of crazy event, but it's isolated and it's over and we move on with our lives. The grid doesn't go down, supply chains keep moving, and we move on. In that second scenario, I think that we're in for a slow decline. Because a lot of people talk about like, oh, this kind of big event kind of thing where some big event happens and society collapses. I think we may be looking at a slow decline, which may be scarier because in a big collapse, if you're a prepper like me, if you've got supplies, if you've got plans, you're like, all right, it's time. Here we go. Activate all the plans. When it's a slow decline, it's a little trickier because how do you know when it's time to do what? For instance, let's say you have a bug out location. Let's say you've got a cabin in the woods and your plan in the event of a collapse is to go out to your cabin in the woods and live off the land. When do you go? Do you go when you lose your job? Do you go when milk is $10 a gallon? What about when it's $20 a gallon? Do you go when, the stock market crashes? Do you go when we go into another COVID lockdown? Maybe that's it. Maybe we go into another COVID lockdown and you go out to the woods and you're like, you know what? Never mind. Do you go when there's a mob coming through your neighborhood? When do you go? And that's the scary part, is because you can prep and you can prepare, you can do all this stuff to prepare, but when is it time? If there's no big catastrophe, if it's a slow decline of our society and our civilization into poverty, into despair, into third world nation status, when do you go? When do you start gardening? When do you start breaking into your emergency food supplies? When do you start bartering? And so I think that is something to consider, especially for those of y'all who have taken my advice and who are preppers, who are preparing. Maybe you just started preparing, maybe you've been doing it for a while. But it's something to think about is what do you do if it's a slow decline? Because I think that's a possibility. I look at the COVID stuff and I look at Cuomo and Governor Cuomo and Mayor Lori Lightfoot talking about reopening, using the talking points the conservatives used back in May about how we have to reopen and we can't afford to stay closed no matter what the case numbers are. In fact, New York's case numbers are actually really high right now. And now, it was like when they were low, we couldn't reopen. They couldn't open up. But now they're high and now Cuomo says it's time to open. What that tells me is that we're repeating the cycle of 2020. Because this time last year, we were looking at impeachment, right? The Democrats were trying to impeach Trump this time last year. The COVID was, there were talks of a virus, of a new virus, but the Democrats said it's not that big of a deal. The WHO said it's not that big of a deal. What we're seeing now is a little variation of that because obviously COVID still exists and people are still panicked about COVID. But I think there's this sense of people saying, well, the vaccine's starting to roll out. We can't, we don't necessarily have to wait for everybody to get it. We can start to open up. But at the same time, there were murmurings and discussions of new strains that they're claiming are going to be more contagious, more infectious, and maybe resistant to existing treatments or resistant to the vaccine. And so I would not be surprised if New York, Illinois, like all these places that were, even Michigan maybe, start to reopen with masks, with social distancing, with whatever, but they start to reopen. And a month or two goes by. Maybe it's February, maybe it's March. And then, oh, New data, the new strains, vaccine doesn't work. Our treatments don't work. The antibody, plasma, whatever treatments don't work. So, got to shut down again. And here's why. Because I honestly believe at this point, at all this time, I was like, what is the goal? Is it just to create more dependency on government? At first, that's what I thought it was, but no, it's more than that. The more I see the corporations that benefit from COVID, the corporations that have grown dramatically while small businesses have disappeared. I believe that if society does not collapse this week, what we're going to be looking at in 2021 is an attempt by the left, by the government, because essentially the government is now going to be controlled by the left. The Democrats are going to have, House, Senate, presidency, and they're going to pack the courts. They're going to have all three branches of government, both houses of Congress. There's going to be a concerted effort this year to destroy the remaining small businesses that are still open, that are still working, and make all businesses that continue to be open, any small business that continues to run, especially online businesses, because those are the hardest ones to get rid of, right? Because you can't shut those down for COVID. But I think there's going to be an effort to make it so that any independent businesses that still exist are forced to run on Amazon Web Services. And any brick and mortar small businesses are replaced by corporations. Every small retailer is replaced by a Walmart or Amazon. Every restaurant is replaced by a chain, whether it's fast food or a sit down by the national chain that's owned by a corporation that's one of the big, you have these couple of big corporations that own all the little companies that you think are independent and really aren't. And we get to the point where every person in America, just about, with a few minor exceptions, is working for and shopping at businesses controlled by those corporations, such that if the government if the powers that be want something to be implemented, they don't have to do it through legislation or executive order. They do it through the companies. And we saw that with masks and lockdowns and social distancing. Very rarely were those enforced by government order or by arrests. We saw businesses that were fined, we saw people that were arrested, but for the vast majority of this pandemic, whatever, the unconstitutional mandates were enforced by businesses. If we get to the point where the big corporations that are entangled with the government, see, these are not free market corporations. This isn't the free market at work. This is corporations that are entangled with the government, where there really is very little distinction at this point between these corporations and the government. The corporations can enforce whatever policies the government can't. Because that's always been the thing. The government can't enforce half the things that they want to do on their own. They rely on our compliance. But if you can get the corporations to enforce these things, you can do whatever you want. You can enforce cultural changes. You can't say this, you can't say that. You have to accept these people. You have to agree with those people. You can't express anything that is construed as being against our protected groups. Like, they can control speech, they can control your purchasing, they can control everything. What you see, what you hear, what you buy, what you eat. All of that under the control of a couple of corporations. And they're going to make it as difficult as possible for you to be self-sufficient, or for your community to be self-sufficient. I've been advocating for communities that are self-sufficient, where the people within the community are providing the things that the community needs, that people are buying and selling locally, supporting each other, working together, and reducing reliance on national supply chains. The effort this year is going to be to destroy any ability to be independent from the national supply chains unless you are completely off grid. And this is where I see here's the pushback, because that sounds real bleak, right? So, what do we do about it? You know what we do? We create our own grid. And I don't just mean the power grid. I don't mean like we create our own power grid. We create our own infrastructure. And we're seeing it with the social media alternatives that are thriving. Gab. Gab created their own server, their own payment processor, their own everything because they knew that they could get kicked off of any other vendor that they had. Gab went and did everything themselves. Now, they have their own browser, right? It's not that great compared to, say, Chrome or Firefox, but it's independent. It's not controlled by one of the big corporations. And so it won't censor you. It won't track you. It won't sell your data, right? We're going to have to create our own infrastructure. And so there's a couple of really cool possibilities with that. So I want to share. Let's see. Let me do this. There we go. Okay. So I want to share a cool thing that I just heard of literally today. And let me find it. So it's called PocketNet, and you may have heard of it because literally, I think a lot of people just found out about it because of, let's see, because of Tim Pool. So Tim Pool talked about it on his IRL podcast last night. And so there we go. Okay. So PocketNet is what it's called. And it's a beta. It's in beta testing. But what this is this is a decentralized blockchain-based social media. That means there is no company that can censor this. There is no server that can shut this down. Now there are lots of good browsers out there that won't kind of do all this censorship and stuff like that, and you can always switch to different things. But this is just if I go to blockchain, it's not blockchain, PocketNet.app, PocketNet.app. Now I haven't made an account yet. I just found out about it. I'm just kind of still researching it, but the concept here is really interesting. So it runs off of blockchain, meaning that there is no way to for somebody to come through and censor it. There is a way, I think, to take down content. They have some kind of system essentially for illegal content. And so this is the one thing that worries me about. There is a way to report or flag stuff, but the idea is that it's based on reputation. So it's the kind of thing where if you get in early and you build up your reputation by posting good content that people engage with, you then have kind of some power in the process, but it's kind of essentially owned by and moderated by everybody. So there's some stuff that I don't fully understand. There's stuff that I worry about how things could go wrong. But for the most part, I look at this and I'm like, you know what? This, I think, is potentially the future. So let's go to About Us and let me see if I can explain a little better how this works. So it's like, how is PocketNet different from? And it's the whole idea that there is no company, right? It's not a corporate entity. It's not a corporation. It's the creators themselves. And essentially, it's open source. It's run by volunteers who programmed it, and they're essentially going to have their own cryptocurrency that's going to be associated with it. And you essentially earn the cryptocurrency, which can then, I guess, somehow be exchanged for other cryptocurrencies, and then therefore, like That's what I'm trying to understand, is if it's something where you essentially earn pocket coin and then you can like, because there's all these cryptocurrencies out there and there's ways to transfer from one cryptocurrency. Like you could go from potentially you could go from pocket coin to Bitcoin if there's an exchange for that. But the question is, what is pocket coin used for? What do you use pocket coin to do? Because it talks about like you get your earnings and you get um, essentially that all the revenue from advertisement is like goes directly to the creators. There's no kind of like admin overhead, whatever. I don't know. I'm still learning about it, but it's something that is worth looking into. Like I think you guys should check it out. If you're kind of like, you know, interested in this decentralization concept. Because I think, like I said, we need our own infrastructure. And that may mean communities that go out and build small towns. It may be literally either an existing small town where that already has a good, strong community kind of coming together and being more self sufficient and less reliant on national supply chains. Or it could literally be you get a group of people who are all kind of on the same page value wise, and they buy a piece of land and they build their homes on it and they build farms and they build infrastructure, you know, um, and build their own like little towns and things where they are not dependent on the national supply chain. Maybe they still use it, maybe they still interact with it, but they're not dependent on it. And if it's shut down, they'd be okay. That's, I think, where we have to go, because the grid, if you think of the grid as not just electricity, but utilities, internet, supply chain, the whole grid of the whole infrastructure of our society has been essentially co opted by the corporations. What do we do? How do we, uh, how do we go on? How do we subvert that? And I think the way to go about it is to learn how to build our own infrastructure and operate outside of the infrastructure that exists. And so things like downloading a Tor browser. Okay, if you don't know what Tor is, Tor, Tor browser, Google it or DuckDuckGo it. Probably better DuckDuckGo it. There's a Tor browser app for the iPhone that works, that's good. You can be outside of the big tech, whatever. There are independent things out there already that exist. We have to learn to use what already exists that's outside of the overall infrastructure, and we have to start building our own infrastructure, whether that's literal physical infrastructure, utilities, supply chain, stuff like that, that's localized, decentralized. We have to decentralize, right? And that means building new things that are outside of the centralized infrastructure, because the centralized infrastructure is owned by the government and the corporations. And if they decide that they don't like you, they can cut you off. Now, here's the thing. How long? How long before they cut off people's utilities, their power and water, for defying the narrative? Trick question. It's already happened. In Los Angeles over the summer, people who had large parties in defiance of COVID lockdowns had their water and power cut off by the city of Los Angeles. That's right. People who disagreed with the narrative and acted accordingly got their utilities cut off. It's already happened. It hasn't happened to you yet, probably, but it is happening. It has happened. It will happen. You need to be aware of the power that they hold, and that you have government, mainstream media, and corporations, all controlled by the same group of people. You look at that bill, that spending bill, and you look at how much of that money went to special interests And this isn't just, oh, this is my special interest, this is my thing that no, these are politicians who have either their own business interests or family members with business interests that benefit from this government spending. They are putting money in their own pockets. They are putting power and influence in their own pockets. There are politicians, corporate elites, corporate executives. Uh, you look at the you look at the list of richest people. I don't know if Elon Musk really, I think he's kind of an outlier, but you look at Bezos, Zuckerberg, you look at any of these people, Bill Gates, and you look at the things that they're doing, and you realize that they're all, that we have this kind of elite, this kind of powers that be group, this oligarchy that controls the government, the media, technology, the infrastructure. They control everything you interact with in your life. The food you eat, the information you receive, what you watch, what you do, what you say, they control it. And the only solution is to decentralize, is to get out of their ecosystem. And the only way to get out of their ecosystem is for us to build our own. So things like PocketNet, Gab is a great example. Um, Honestly, I wouldn't, I wouldn't discount things like cryptocurrencies because you don't think the banks, I mean, we already have literally, I think it's HSBC or whatever bank that has already started closing accounts of people who don't wear a mask when they walk into the branch. What happens when your bank closes your account because you posted something in support of Trump on Twitter? Or even just because you have an account. Let's say you donate to a Republican candidate who's a pro Trump, whatever candidate, and the bank says, we don't want you as a customer anymore, and they close out your account. What if you could donate to the candidates you like without your bank knowing? I mean, sure, you could send them some cash, or you can't even write them a check. You can send them cash, right? But then you're sending cash in the mail, and our cash is, our currency is devaluing by the day. So what do? Cryptocurrency, right? There are other alternatives. There are blockchain-based pseudonym. They're not anonymous, but they're pseudonymous or whatever you want to call it. Um, but things where you can protect your identity, things where you can make transactions that are harder to track, right? Things where you can make transactions that are harder to control, where somebody can't stop you from making that transaction, where you hold your wallet, not the bank. It's time to be looking at those options. It's time to be looking at those solutions. And it's time, I think this is a great time for libertarians, conservatives, Republicans to all kind of get on the same page about censorship, about corporations, about privacy, and to work together on things like decentralization, um, privacy, and the ability for people to make transactions freely without government interference. Right now, if you want to go buy Bitcoin in the United States, anywhere you go to buy Bitcoin, you have to show your ID. Why? I don't have to show my ID if I go make a cash transaction. I could go work for somebody, they could pay me in cash, I could go spend that cash, and my ID would, and nobody would ever have to know who I was. But if you buy Bitcoin anywhere, Bitcoin ATM, Bitcoin online, no matter where you go, you have to show your ID. They know and I think we need to start talking about how do you do anything anonymously? How do you get outside the infrastructure? Does it mean we need new cryptocurrencies that are outside of the regulations? Do we need ways of transacting in cryptocurrency that are outside of banking laws? Whatever that may be, I don't know. But decentralization is what has to happen. And so it's time for those of you who are new to this idea of decentralization. Those of y'all who never would have imagined that you'd be looking for how to get outside of the infrastructure because you thought the infrastructure was good until it wasn't. It's time for all of us to start working together, educating each other, doing our research, seeking alternatives, and starting to build new alternatives where the good things don't exist. You're looking for an alternative for something and you're not finding it, it's time to build it. And above all, it is time for you to reach out to your friends, family members, community. Get connected to people who share your values and share your priorities, and get disconnected from the infrastructure and start building your own. Decentralize, build your own infrastructure, build your own grid. Okay? It's time. Because most likely, nothing overly over the top will happen on Wednesday. Most likely, there may be some kind of chaos, there may be some kind of protests, just enough as to be a distraction, just enough to be, oh, okay, there we go. That was our big thing. All right, now we can all move on, right? But when we move on, when Biden becomes president, takes the office and puts in his cabinet, we need to understand what that means and where we're headed and how the censorship will get worse and how to avoid becoming the radicalized, insurgents that the left thinks we already are. We have to start being constructive instead of destructive. We have to start building our own alternatives. That is how we move forward. So I hope that made sense. Because a lot of people are like, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And yeah, there's a possibility that everything falls apart and our society collapses. That's a possibility. But I think the collapse is going to be slow, and I think that's the most dangerous collapse at all because so many people won't see it coming until it's too late. So now is the time to see it coming and to be preemptive and proactive and start building the alternate infrastructure before it's too late, before we're in another Great Depression, before we're the equivalent of a third world country. Build the infrastructure now. So, 2 weeks of food and water, a method of defending yourself, a community that's got your back and you got their back, and a method of getting more food and water in the event that supply lines go down. Because 2 weeks of food and water will get you through an initial crisis, but it will not last more than 2 weeks, if that. So having a way to replenish your supplies, having a way to be self-sufficient in the event that supply lines go down is crucial. So I hope that helps. Please feel free to leave comments, ask questions. I'm on Tumblr. Maybe I'll put up my little lower third again. I'm gonna have to make this smaller because I don't like this how much of the screen this takes up. but you can like, subscribe, share, and connect. It's good to have multiple ways of connecting because we don't know what's going to happen to any platform. Now, Gab, if you'll see, right there we go. See right there, I've got Tumblr, Gab, and Ko-fi, Ko-fi. Those are all, I'm pro-life, pro-liberty on all of those platforms. Ko-fi is a donation platform if you feel like supporting my channel, if you support the work that I do, and you want to buy me a coffee. So buy me a coffee and, say thank you or whatever, or, whatever you want to do. That's there. I just put that out there because occasionally somebody does, and I appreciate that. So, and then Gab. So Gab is the decentralized, or it's not totally decentralized, but it's at least independent. It doesn't run on Amazon. They have their own servers, they have their own browser, they have their own everything. And so that's where I am right now, as a backup for Twitter and Tumblr and YouTube. so that if any of those go down, I'm still reachable and I can still post. So if you're concerned about the censorship, if you've already been kicked off of one of any of these platforms, like Twitter or Tumblr or Facebook or whatever, if you've already been kicked off, at least come follow me on Gab. I'll try to start posting there more often. I'll at least post my live stream links there. Um, but again, those are the platforms I'm on. Twitter is the only one where I have a different username because they won't allow that many characters for pro life, pro liberty. It's too many characters. So I'm pro life underscore liberty on Twitter, but everything else is pro life, pro liberty. I'm looking at PocketNet. I may end up being on PocketNet soon. I'll let you know next week if that's where I end up. Um, and for now, I'm still on Tumblr as my main social media because they haven't kicked me off yet. I have had several friends on Tumblr get kicked off and, find their way back. But, um, I'm still on Tumblr as long as they allow me to be there because I'm still having great interactions with people there and there's still good people on Tumblr. I'm actually, I've been interacting with lots of people. It's actually, I guess I can say this because I've posted publicly about it. So, but I've been interacting with a mom who's pregnant, who's, in a crisis situation. She's posted asking for help. And so, yeah, you can find that post on my blog. I should probably pin it or something. But it's down a ways on my blog, but you can find that post. And she's been asking for support and help. And maybe I'll link it in the description. I'll find that post and I'll link it in the description so that you can check that out. And then, but she's been asking for support and stuff with her pregnancy. But so I've been having some good interactions with people, and that's why I'm still on Tumblr for situations like that, right? Where I'm able to help somebody or connect with somebody who's in crisis. Um, and also because that's where the majority of my followers still are. I have 5,500, 5,500 followers ish on Tumblr right now. So I'm not leaving it anytime soon. That's still my primary method of connecting with people. But yeah, please do like, subscribe, share videos, share my posts, connect in whatever way you feel like you can. Now that I have this lighting, I do like it. I mean, I get a little bit of glare, but honestly, it's not terrible. It's better than how my lighting was before. So I may start doing some more videos just because I've got this now and it's fun. So thank you. And I will see y'all next week. Oh, yeah. Next week, possibility that I will either stream early. So just watch out for those posts on either on Tumblr or on Gab or on Twitter. I'll post on all three. So whichever way you follow me, just keep an eye out for if I may stream early, because I am going to be at the Texas Rally for Life, which starts at 2 p.m. Potentially meeting people at 1:30, that sort of thing. So 1:30 is normally when I'm wrapping up my stream. So I may have to kind of like start at 12 or something like that. And we'll see what that looks like. So I will give you a heads up, but I still do plan to stream even if it's a different time. Or even if I stream from the rally. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe. But thank you guys. Again, I'm going to try and coordinate the time where this shuts off because for whatever reason it keeps cutting me off. So thank you. Y'all have a great week. Thanks for watching Pro Life, Pro Liberty Live. Stay safe. Honestly, I would not recommend if you do hear about protests for the 20th for inauguration, I would recommend not going to them because chances are something crazy could happen. So anyway, stay safe. See y'all next week. And y'all have